Behind the rhinestones and cowboy hats, country music has always had its darker side. Fame, fortune, and outlaw spirit often collided with the law, leaving behind a trail of arrests, mugshots, and unforgettable scandals. In today's video, we take a closer look at 10 country stars who couldn't stay out of jail. Legends whose run-ins with police became as famous as their songs. Johnny Cash, the man in black behind bars. Johnny Cash is remembered as one of the most iconic figures in country music, but behind the legend was a man who spent years battling addiction, reckless behavior, and frequent run-ins with the law. Long before he became the beloved Man in Black, Cash's darker impulses landed him in handcuffs more times than many fans realize. Cash's legal troubles began in the late 1950s and escalated throughout the 1960s, largely fueled by his dependence on amphetamines and barbiturates. He was first arrested in 1959 for smuggling pills across the U.S.-Mexico border, when authorities caught him with hundreds of pills hidden inside his guitar case. Though he avoided serious prison time, this set the stage for a reputation as a troublemaker. Over the next decade, he would be arrested nearly 30 times for offenses ranging from public drunkenness and disorderly conduct to drug possession. His repeated clashes with the law earned him an almost outlaw mystique that paradoxically boosted his appeal among fans. One of his most infamous arrests occurred in 1965 when Cash was taken into custody in El Paso, Texas, for carrying amphetamines across the border. Just a few years later, he was arrested again in Starkville, Mississippi, for trespassing after drunkenly picking flowers in a stranger's yard. That bizarre incident became part of Cash's lore and was later immortalized in his song Starkville City Jail. While other stars might have crumbled under the weight of scandal, Cash leaned into it, weaving his mistakes into his music and image. Despite his troubles, Cash avoided serving long prison sentences. Instead, he often received fines or short stints in local jails. Ironically, his brushes with the law inspired one of his most enduring legacies, his prison concerts. Performing at Folsom Prison in 1968 and San Quentin in 1969, Cash turned his own near incarcerations into a powerful connection with inmates, giving them a voice through his songs. These performances solidified his reputation as the ultimate outlaw of country music, a man who lived on the edge but never lost his humanity. Johnny Cash's story is a reminder of how close the line between self-destruction and genius can be. His arrests painted him as a rebel, but his music transformed that rebellion into timeless art. For Cash, the jailhouse was both a personal reality and a stage where he cemented his legend. Merle Haggard, from prisoner to poet of the common man. Before Merle Haggard became one of the most celebrated voices in country music, he lived a life that could have ended in permanent ruin. Known for his gritty honesty and songs that spoke to the struggles of everyday Americans, Haggard's perspective came not from observation alone, but from hard experience. Unlike many country stars who merely flirted with trouble, Merle Haggard actually lived behind bars, and it shaped everything he later became. Haggard's trouble with the law began in his teenage years. Born in Oildale, California, he was a restless kid who often skipped school and ran away from home. By the age of 14, he was already involved in petty theft, burglary, and even hopped freight trains, trying to chase adventure, but finding only trouble. His juvenile record grew until, by 1957, he attempted to rob a roadhouse tavern. That crime landed him in California's notorious San Quentin prison, the same place where Johnny Cash would later record one of his most famous live albums. At San Quentin, Haggard served nearly 3 years. The prison hardened him, but also gave him a chance to reflect. He reportedly witnessed an execution, an event that shook him to his core. Instead of leaving prison broken, Haggard walked out determined to turn his life around. Music became his salvation. Drawing from his rough past, he began writing and performing songs that told the truth about working-class struggles, lost love, and the mistakes that haunt a man's soul. His time in jail never fully left his identity. Haggard was candid about his past, and fans respected him for it. Songs like Branded Man and Mama Tried were direct reflections of his prison years, resonating deeply with those who knew hardship. Instead of hiding his criminal history, he wove it into his art, transforming shame into authenticity. That honesty became his greatest strength, making him one of the most relatable figures in country music. Remarkably, in 1972, then California Governor Ronald Reagan granted Haggard a full pardon for his past crimes, officially wiping his record clean. But by then, Haggard's reputation had long been secured, not as a criminal, but as a voice of redemption. His journey from outlaw to legend embodied the very spirit of country music: resilience, repentance, and the search for dignity in a rough world. Merle Haggard's time in prison could have ended his story, but instead, it became the foundation of his artistry. He proved that even the darkest chapters can be rewritten into songs that touch millions. David Allan Coe, outlaw with a rap sheet as long as his songbook. If any country star embodied the term outlaw in the most literal sense, it was David Allan Coe. While many artists built a bad boy image for their careers, Coe lived it long before he ever stepped on a stage. His criminal record, time behind bars, and wild reputation made him both a controversial figure and an unforgettable name in the outlaw country movement. Coe's troubled life began early. Born in Akron, Ohio in 1939, he grew up in a broken home and was in and out of reform schools by his early teens. By the time he was a young man, Coe had already racked up a long list of offenses, including theft, armed robbery, and carjacking. His criminal activity eventually landed him in some of the toughest prisons in Ohio. Unlike some country stars who only flirted with the law, Coe spent a large portion of his youth incarcerated, giving him first-hand experience of the harsh realities of prison life. It was inside prison walls that Coe found his calling as a songwriter and performer. He began writing songs that told of desperation, loneliness, and defiance. After his release in the mid-1960s, he moved to Nashville and started pushing his way into the country music scene. His early years were rough, with Coe often living in his car or crashing wherever he could. But his persistence paid off when other artists began recording his songs. Tanya Tucker scored a hit with his "Would You Lay With Me" in a Field of Stone, and Johnny Paycheck turned Coe's "Take This Job and Shove It" into an anthem for working-class frustration. Despite his success, Coe never escaped controversy. His lyrics were often raw, explicit, and unapologetically rebellious, which alienated some mainstream audiences while earning him a cult following among fans of outlaw country. Stories about his wild behavior off stage, including bar fights, run-ins with the police, and open defiance of authority, kept his name in the headlines. Though much of his criminal activity happened before his fame, the outlaw image stuck with him for life. David Allan Coe's career is proof of how a troubled past can shape an artist's identity. He never shied away from his rap sheet. Instead, he wore it as a badge of honor, infusing his music with a raw honesty that couldn't be faked. While critics often dismissed him as too rough or too offensive, his songs remain staples of the outlaw era. To his fans, Coe wasn't just singing about rebellion, he was rebellion. George Jones, the Possum and his tangled troubles with the law. George Jones is celebrated as one of the greatest voices in country music history, but his personal life was a storm of alcohol, self-destruction, and frequent brushes with the law. Known as the Possum, Jones had a voice that could break your heart, yet his demons often dragged him into police custody as much as they pushed him onto the stage. Jones's troubles were rooted in his long battle with alcoholism. Beginning in the 1950s, as his career was taking off, he developed a reputation for drinking heavily and missing shows, a pattern that only worsened with time. His legendary nickname, No Show Jones, came from his habit of failing to appear for concerts, often because he was too drunk or locked up to perform. Arrests for public intoxication, reckless driving, and disorderly conduct became almost routine in his life. One infamous incident occurred when Jones's then-wife hid the keys to their car to keep him from going to town for alcohol. Undeterred, Jones drove a riding lawnmower several miles down the highway to buy booze. While it didn't lead to an arrest, it epitomized the out-of-control lifestyle that frequently brought police to his doorstep. More seriously, his arrests for drunken brawls and violent outbursts painted a darker picture of his struggles. In the 1970s and early 1980s, Jones's behavior spiraled even further. He faced multiple arrests for DUI and was once reportedly jailed after a violent altercation during a drunken rage. The press had a field day with his antics, and while fans shook their heads, they also sympathized with a man whose immense talent was constantly sabotaged by addiction. For years, it seemed that Jones was destined to drink and fight his way into an early grave. But remarkably, George Jones managed to turn his life around in his later years. After marrying Nancy Sepulveda in 1983, he finally found stability and sobriety. Though his earlier years were marked by arrests and chaos, his comeback earned him redemption in the eyes of fans and critics alike. Songs like "He Stopped Loving Her Today" reminded the world why he was considered one of the finest country singers of all time, regardless of his personal demons. George Jones's brushes with the law were not glamorous. They were painful chapters of a life nearly destroyed by addiction. Yet they also humanized him, making his music even more powerful. Every arrest, every stumble, seemed to echo in his voice, which carried the ache of a man who had lived on the edge and somehow survived. Willie Nelson, the outlaw who couldn't outrun the law. Willie Nelson is one of the most beloved figures in country music, but his long career has also been punctuated by frequent encounters with the police. Unlike some of his peers whose arrests stemmed from violence or alcohol-fueled chaos, Nelson's legal troubles almost always revolved around one thing: marijuana. His advocacy for cannabis, combined with his personal use, repeatedly put him at odds with the law, giving him a rap sheet nearly as legendary as his catalog of songs. Nelson's first major run-in with the law came in the 1970s, just as the outlaw country movement was hitting its stride. Already known for his long hair, free-spirited persona, and anti-establishment attitude, he was quickly associated with the counterculture. While other country singers tried to project a clean image, Willie embraced being the rebel, and that meant being unapologetic about his marijuana use. Over the decades, he was arrested multiple times for possession, each time making headlines. One of his most publicized arrests happened in 1994 when police in Texas stopped him and found marijuana in his car. He later joked that the real crime was that the officers didn't let him finish the joint before hauling him in. In 2006, Nelson and several members of his band were arrested in Louisiana after authorities found marijuana and psychedelic mushrooms on his tour bus. He avoided serious jail time but faced fines and probation, once again cementing his image as the outlaw elder statesman of country music. Even in his 70s and 80s, Nelson wasn't immune from trouble. In 2010, at the age of 77, he was arrested in Sierra Blanca, Texas, when Border Patrol agents discovered marijuana on his tour bus. Instead of being ashamed, Nelson turned the incident into advocacy, launching a campaign to support the legalization of cannabis. His repeated arrests, rather than damaging his reputation, only endeared him more to fans who admired his honesty and refusal to compromise his lifestyle. Willie Nelson's legal troubles never derailed his career. In fact, they became part of his brand. While other artists saw their reputations shattered by jail time, Nelson transformed his arrests into proof of his authenticity as an outlaw. His run-ins with the law made him both a symbol of rebellion and a folk hero to those who believed in personal freedom. For Nelson, jail was never the end of the story. It was just another chapter in the legend of a man who lived life on his own terms. His music, his activism, and even his arrests told the same truth. Willie Nelson would always be Willie Nelson, no matter what the law said. Billy Joe Shaver, a barroom shooting and the Outlaws trial. Billy Joe Shaver never reached the commercial heights of some of his peers, but in outlaw country circles, his name carries almost mythical weight. Known as a songwriter's songwriter, he penned classics for Waylon Jennings, Elvis Presley, and Chris Christopherson. Yet Shaver's reputation wasn't built only on music. It was forged in the fires of a violent incident that landed him in court and nearly behind bars for good. Shaver grew up rough in Texas, and that toughness always followed him. His songs, filled with grit and truth, mirrored his own life of hard living, broken marriages, and barroom scuffles. But the defining moment of his outlaw image came on March 31st, 2007, in Lorena, Texas. After a heated altercation outside a bar called Papa Joe's Texas Saloon, Shaver pulled out a handgun and shot a man named Billy Coker in the face. Remarkably, Coker survived the gunshot. The shooting sparked headlines across the country, and Shaver suddenly found himself not just a country music legend, but the subject of a serious criminal trial. Prosecutors charged him with aggravated assault, and the case dragged on for years. During this time, Shaver faced both legal and public scrutiny. Many wondered if the 67-year-old singer-songwriter's career had finally come to an end. Yet Shaver maintained that he acted in self-defense, claiming that Coker had threatened him and that he feared for his life. The trial finally began in 2010, and it became as much a media spectacle as a legal battle. Shaver's defense team called on a surprising witness to testify to his character, fellow country outlaw Willie Nelson. Ultimately, the jury acquitted Shaver of the charges, accepting his claim of self-defense. The verdict kept him out of prison, but the ordeal cemented his reputation as one of the toughest and most unpredictable figures in country music. Shaver even addressed the incident in song, recording "Wacko from Waco," where he half-jokingly described the shooting and its aftermath. Instead of hiding from his troubles, he turned them into art, much like the rest of his career. The shooting became another chapter in the outlaw mythology, not just about living hard, but surviving it. Billy Joe Shaver's story is a reminder that the outlaw label in country music wasn't always just a marketing tool. For him, it was a lived reality, filled with danger, regret, and resilience. His near miss with prison only made his legend larger, proving that sometimes the line between a country song and real life is razor thin. Hank Williams Jr., living wild in his father's shadow. Hank Williams Jr. grew up in the impossible shadow of his legendary father, Hank Williams Sr. While he eventually carved out his own path as a Southern rock-inspired country star, his life off stage was often just as turbulent as his rowdy anthems. Arrests, bar fights, and substance abuse fueled a reputation that made him both a controversial figure and a fitting heir to the outlaw spirit of country music. By the 1970s, Hank Jr. was already breaking away from the traditional Nashville sound, embracing a harder-edged, rebellious persona. His personal life reflected that shift. He developed a reputation for heavy drinking, drug use, and a quick temper, a combination that often ended with flashing police lights. He was arrested multiple times for disorderly conduct, public intoxication, and assault stemming from barroom altercations. To fans, these incidents only amplified his image as a hard-living country boy who played by his own rules. One notorious episode came in the early 1980s, when Hank Jr. was involved in a drunken brawl that led to his arrest. Stories of him destroying hotel rooms and getting into fistfights with fans or fellow musicians became part of his legend. His legal troubles didn't just make tabloid fodder. They also underscored the darker side of a man trying to escape his father's legacy while battling his own demons. Hank Jr.'s arrests and wild behavior threatened to derail his career at several points. Yet he consistently rebounded with hit songs that spoke to the very lifestyle he was living. Tracks like Whiskey Bent and Hellbound and Family Tradition weren't just catchy titles. They were autobiographical confessions that resonated with fans who admired his honesty. The very vices that brought him into conflict with the law also fueled the raw authenticity of his music. Though his brushes with police painted him as reckless, Hank Williams Jr. survived an ordeal that could have ended everything: a near-fatal fall from a Montana mountain in 1975. After months of recovery, he returned to the stage with a new look: sunglasses and a beard to cover his scars, and an even wilder reputation. His run-ins with the law continued, but by then, his outlaw image had become part of the package. Hank Williams Jr.'s arrests and scandals didn't diminish his career. If anything, they solidified his place as one of country's most unapologetic outlaws. He lived hard, sang harder, and proved that sometimes chaos and creativity go hand in hand. Glen Campbell, rhinestone cowboy in handcuffs. Glen Campbell is often remembered for his smooth voice, guitar mastery, and crossover success with songs like Rhinestone Cowboy and Wichita Lineman. But behind the polished image of a country pop superstar, Campbell endured turbulent years marked by alcohol, cocaine addiction, and several humiliating run-ins with the law. His brushes with jail became part of a darker chapter that contrasted sharply with the clean, all-American persona he once projected. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Campbell's career was at its commercial peak. Yet fame brought pressure, and Campbell increasingly leaned on alcohol and drugs to cope. His substance abuse spiraled out of control, straining his personal relationships and eroding his professional reliability. What had once been minor rumors of drinking turned into front-page news when his addictions began leading directly to arrests. In November 2003, Campbell made national headlines when he was arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, for drunk driving and a hit-and-run accident. According to reports, he struck another car near his home, fled the scene, and was later picked up by police. When officers arrived, they found him intoxicated and belligerent. During the arrest, Campbell allegedly kicked an officer, which led to an additional charge of aggravated assault. The image of the once family-friendly star in a mugshot, disheveled and clearly under the influence, shocked fans across the country. Campbell spent 10 days in jail after pleading guilty to extreme DUI and leaving the scene of an accident. Though the sentence was relatively light, the damage to his reputation was profound. Newspapers and tabloids seized on the fall of the rhinestone cowboy, painting him as yet another example of a star undone by fame and excess. For many, it was a painful reminder that even the brightest talents can be brought low by addiction. Remarkably, Campbell attempted to rebuild his image in the years that followed. He entered rehab, sought treatment, and made efforts to reconnect with his music and fans. Though his legal troubles never entirely disappeared from memory, Campbell managed to stage comebacks, performing and recording into his later years. His final act, bravely touring and releasing music after his Alzheimer's diagnosis, reframed his story not as one of downfall, but of resilience and dignity. Glenn Campbell's arrests stand as a stark reminder of the fragility of fame. They reveal the human behind the superstar. A man vulnerable to temptation and mistakes, yet capable of redemption. His time in jail may have tarnished his image, but it also added a layer of complexity to the legacy of one of country's most versatile and gifted performers. Steve Earle, hard time for a hard-edged troubadour. Steve Earle is known as one of the most uncompromising voices in country and Americana, a songwriter who has never shied away from the raw and the real. But his talent has always been shadowed by a troubled personal life, one that dragged him into addiction, crime, and eventually a jail cell. Unlike some stars whose arrests were brief stumbles, Earle's downfall in the early 1990s nearly cost him both his freedom and his career. Earle's rise in the 1980s was meteoric. His breakout album Guitar Town, 1986, earned critical acclaim and commercial success, establishing him as a new force in country music. But behind the scenes, he was sliding into heavy heroin and cocaine use. His erratic behavior led to canceled shows, broken contracts, and a reputation for being unreliable. By the early 1990s, his drug habit had consumed him completely, and the law inevitably caught up. In 1993, Earle was arrested in Nashville for possession of heroin and cocaine, as well as illegal firearms. The charges were serious, and for a while it looked as if the once promising artist might become just another tragic cautionary tale. He spent several months in jail, where he was forced to confront the reality of how far he had fallen. For Earle, prison wasn't just a punishment, it was a turning point. Rather than allowing the experience to end him, Earle used it as a wake-up call. After his release, he entered rehab and began the long road to sobriety. Unlike some artists who tried to hide their jail time, Earle confronted it openly, using it as fuel for his music. His 1995 comeback album, Train A-Comin', was both critically acclaimed and deeply personal, signaling that he had survived his darkest chapter. Earle has since spoken candidly about his time in jail, describing it as both humiliating and necessary. The honesty with which he addresses his past, in interviews and in his songs, has earned him respect as not only a musician, but as a survivor. His later works, filled with social commentary and hard-won wisdom, carry a weight that only comes from someone who has lived through real hardship. Steve Earle's time behind bars is a testament to the razor-thin line between self-destruction and redemption. His jail stint could have silenced him forever, but instead, it became the foundation for a remarkable second act. Today, his story is not just about a fall from grace, but about the resilience of a man who fought his way back from the edge. Trace Adkins, a towering voice with a troubled past. Trace Adkins is admired for his booming baritone, larger-than-life presence, and hits like You're Gonna Miss This and Honky Tonk Badonkadonk. But behind his polished career, Adkins has lived a life marked by violence, addiction, and several clashes with the law. While he never served long prison stints, his brushes with jail and reputation for volatility revealed a darker side that nearly derailed his path to stardom. Adkins grew up in Louisiana and carried a rough-and-tumble toughness into adulthood. Before fame, he worked oil rigs and played music on the side, but he also battled alcoholism. His drinking often led to fights, reckless behavior, and run-ins with police. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, as his fame was rising, his private life remained chaotic. Multiple arrests for public intoxication and disorderly conduct painted a picture of a man who couldn't fully control his demons. One of the most dramatic episodes came not from the police, but from his personal life. In 1994, Adkins' second wife famously shot him in the chest during a violent argument. Though he miraculously survived, the bullet missed his heart and lungs by inches. The incident highlighted just how dangerous and unstable his world had become. While that shooting didn't land him in jail, it became part of the troubled image that followed him into the public eye. Later, in 2014, Adkins entered rehab after a drunken altercation on a country music cruise. Reports suggested that he lashed out at a fellow performer in a fit of rage. Although he wasn't jailed, the incident reinforced his reputation as a star whose struggles with alcohol continually put him at risk of losing everything. Law enforcement encounters related to public intoxication and his erratic behavior further cemented the pattern. Yet, like many of his outlaw predecessors, Adkins turned survival into part of his narrative. He addressed his battles with addiction openly, framing them as obstacles he had to overcome. His fans, rather than turning away, often rallied around him, drawn to the honesty of a man who admitted his flaws. Standing at 6'6" with a voice to match, Adkins projected strength, but his brushes with the law revealed his humanity. Vulnerable, fallible, and fighting for redemption. Trace Adkins' story is less about hardened criminality and more about a man waging war with himself. His arrests and near misses with the law serve as reminders of how close even successful stars can come to losing it all. Yet, his survival and continued career prove that falling doesn't always mean the end. Sometimes, it's just part of the song.